Hey! Oh, it's Halloween with a Week 9 preview and the NFL playoff odds on the FTN Fantasy Schatz and Tanier NFL podcast.
I am your podcast partner. Couldn't get this thing tied on right.
What'd you say?
Couldn't get this thing tied on right. Like my wife had tied it for like my son's head when he was like 8. And by the time I untied it, it was 2. So that's why I get this sort of I am Darth Droopy.
For folks who are listening afterwards as a podcast, Mike is wearing a Darth Vader mask to commemorate Halloween.
Not for long.
Not for long. I'm Aaron Schatz from FTN Fantasy. He's Mike Tanier. You know his Substack at miketanier.substack.com. We are going to preview Week 9 in the NFL with the big NFC North battle between the Lions and the Packers and some other good games this week. But first, want to tell you about our sponsor, which is Underdog Fantasy. The NFL season is in gear, and there is no better way to enjoy it than Underdog Fantasy, which is the easiest place to play fantasy sports and the fastest growing app in the industry. Underdog is now offering a new customer FTN special with up to $1,000 on your first time deposit. The Underdog app is easy to use, and the weekly contests like the onside kick, the double doink, and the 2-minute drill are all back. Head over to Underdog for a deposit match up to $1,000 when you sign up with code FTN. That's $1,000 extra, code FTN at Underdog Fantasy. All right, let's start with tonight briefly, because the interesting thing to me about the Texans and the Jets, first of all, I will be there. I'm going tonight to MetLife for my first time at MetLife. And second, O&F says, why are the Jets favored tonight? It is really kind of remarkable that a 2-6 team is favored over a 6-2 team. Mm-hmm. And it's not a case, I don't think, where the advanced metrics say that the 6-2 team is terribly overrated and the 2-6 team is terribly underrated. The Texans are 7th in DVOA right now. The Jets are 24th in DVOA right now. Is Stephon Diggs that important?
No, I got 2 thoughts. My first thought on this is the Jets, since last year, are 8-16-1 against the spread. The house has no idea what to do with the Jets. I think the Jets bring in a lot of casual wagerers, and I think that they are consistently overrated. So that goes back to last year. So when they had Trevor Siemian and Zach Wilson out there, and they were still supposed to be, they were underdogs, they were still not meeting expectations. So I think that there's part of that here. And the other thing is, and I really realized this morning, I think there's a sense that there's a really good Jets team in there that's going to turn it around one of these weeks. And I realized it reminded me of last year's Eagles in December, where we kept looking at this and saying, well, the toxic vibes can't be that bad. Next week is the one they turn it around. This is the gimme game. This is where they turn it around. I think the house and fans and even experts are like, no, they're better than this, and it's going to turn around. And if last year was any indication, it's not going to turn around this year.
Camden Cap says, you guys don't feel like Bobby Slowick wastes first downs too much and waits for CJ Stroud to bail him out? I haven't looked too closely at the Texans offense to see whether that, what the play calls are on first down. But yeah, the Texans offense has been very mediocre this year, but their defense has been fantastic. It's interesting. I looked this morning. There are a lot of teams where there's a big difference between DVOA and EPA because of schedule strength. And the Texans are one of them. The Texans are 8th in EPA per play on defense, but they're 2nd in DVOA because they've played a hard schedule of opposing offenses.
Okay, so it's like, well, you're out there, you're playing the Vikings, you're playing I'm trying to think who the Texans played this year besides the Colts. It seems like they play the Colts every week.
Right. I mean, honestly, did they play the Richardson Colts or did they play the Flacco Colts, I guess?
I think they played the Richardson Colts both times, so they got the
right. That might overrate them a little bit because you have a couple of games of Flacco in those Colts.
Oh, wow.
In those Colts opponent adjustments, but this is a really good defense. And if we're sitting around waiting for this good Jets team that we feel is trapped in there, then we're also sitting around waiting for this good Texans offense that we feel is trapped in there. Although I understand the idea that may not show up until Nico Collins comes back.
Right. Right. And I think Camden Caps, you came in a couple of weeks ago complaining about Sloak's play calling. And I was like, no. I'm looking at it. I feel like things could be optimized a little more. I think I said this on Monday. It'd be nice to see Tank Collins catch a pass in space, get used as,
Tank Dell, I think you mean. Yeah,
Tank Dell, thank you. Yes, as a space player, etc. I feel like there's other things they could do with that, even with the injuries elsewhere. That said, I still think the biggest problem is interior offensive line play, mixed with the fact that we're still getting past the fact that the first couple games of the year, they were committing a dozen penalties a game.
Watch out for passes in the middle of the field, by the way, where the Jets defense ranks 30th, and Stroud has been good this season.
Interesting. And CJ Mosley's been out for a while, which I think is probably...
And he's out in this game, I believe.
He's out in this game, yes. I was looking at them, and I realized how much on their defensive line, the Jets defensive line, like Jermaine Johnson's been out for weeks. I think he's been a big loss. Maybe Reddick overcomes that if he gets more used to it. A lot of their guys in the middle of the defensive line that they're giving a lot of time to are the old 49ers guys, are Kinlaw and Solomon Thomas. The guys the Niners got let go, like their prospects that didn't work out. They're not doing a lot, and that's contributing to the fact that the Jets aren't quite as strong on defense as they were last year.
Before we get to the Sunday, remember, by the way, if you're watching us live, which we do Mondays and Thursdays at 11 a.m., we take your comments and questions. Bill Houston asks, Hopkins, Deontay Johnson, Amari Cooper, which recent moves have moved the needle? He says free agent moves. I think what he means is wide receiver trades.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is all of them.
Yeah. It's an arms race. Everybody got a guy. Right?
I think the answer is all of them. Deontay Johnson is particularly interesting because the ESPN receiver tracking metrics that try to separate the receivers from the quarterbacks love him.
Yes.
But obviously he's played with poor quarterbacking for the last few years, and therefore his other advanced stats are poor. Mm-hmm. And the idea is when you throw him into the Baltimore offense as the number 3 receiver, he is going to suddenly perform at a much higher level. But I think Amari Cooper is a good ad. I think DeAndre Hopkins is a good ad. I think that who is the other one?
Devontae Adams.
Devontae Adams, is a good ad to a team that has a lot of other problems. Right. I think Devontae Adams would be a good ad. If the Houston wins tonight, I think Devontae Adams would be a good ad to another team.
Right. He could be a good ad to Houston, for example. But yeah, that's it. And for a guy like Deontay Johnson, you put him in that offense, and if he does what he normally does, which he's the shallow, short, get open, get you the 5-10 yard pass, that's a huge thing for the Ravens because they do a lot of other things well, but they don't necessarily have that like short pass gobbler, chain mover, and that's what Deontay can be.
Yeah. All right. Speaking of teams that acquired Deontay Johnson, let's talk about some Sunday games. Let's start out with the Denver Broncos at 5-3 at the Baltimore Ravens at 5-3. Broncos make the playoffs 82% of the time if they win, 57% with a loss. Ravens go up to 98% if they win, 87% with a loss. And this is a game with for 2 5-3 teams, this is a really big line. The Ravens are favored by 9.5.
Right off the bat, I don't like the line. I would take a backdoor cover with the Broncos, even though I think they're the inferior team, and I think the Ravens can win. Right off the bat, I would take.
I actually agree with you on that. And as you know, even though I picked the Ravens for the Super Bowl and DVOA loves them, I would also go with the Broncos plus 9.5 here. Here are some interesting stats. Lamar Jackson, 61% pass DVOA against zone coverage.
Wow.
Compared to 33% against man coverage, which is still third in the NFL against man, but he's been fantastic against zone. Denver has been really good in zone, but they're more of a man team. So they like to play man, where Jackson is not quite as good against it. Also, they like to blitz, and people think you should blitz Jackson, but he has a 38% DVOA versus the blitz this year, and the Denver defense is much better this year when it doesn't blitz.
Couple of points. When you have a quarterback who runs as well as Jackson, you want to play more zone because you can keep your underneath defenders facing Jackson as opposed to turning around. So that creates a built-in advantage. So
they could be more of a zone team in this game just to keep Jackson from scrambling.
Right. Broncos right now lead the league in pressures per SIS. Second to the Jets in pressure rate for that source. Lead the league in stuffs, which is no gains in tackle for the loss, in running plays as well. They've been unbelievably good at creating those.
Zach Allen. Zach Allen is an all-pro this year. He is not somebody I've ever thought about at that level. I don't think he's somebody anybody talks about. If you look at every kind of stat that's out there, Zach Allen has been phenomenal this year.
Yep. And he's that sort of, he plays kind of like a 5-tech. He's not like a natural edge rusher, but he's super disruptive. He's creating opportunities for the other guys behind him. Obviously, that secondary is very strong. I do wonder about some of the challenges they faced. We're coming off of a Bryce Young game for this defense. They have a Spencer Rattler game in the data here. So I don't know. I think it's a good defense, but I think they might have a little helium in them right now.
Michael Allen Brewer asks, is Nix actually improving, or is it an artifact of opponents and schedule?
Well, he throws downfield more and completes the pass. He is improving, but I think there are artifacts in there.
I think it's probably a combination of the two. The Ravens defense is 29th against deep passes. So if Nix can throw some of those, they should have some success with them.
Yeah, don't get crazy now. He's figured out like the 15-yard square in to Sutton. He's got that one. He's got all the screens. He runs a little bit. I don't know if we're going to launch it deep too often, though.
Yeah, the Ravens defense has been like the Ravens have one such obvious issue right now, which is pass defense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Their offense is stellar by DVOA and was against Cleveland, by the way. Their offense was still really good against Cleveland.
Yes.
They stopped the run very well. Nick Chubb did not have a day.
No.
Their pass defense has been awful.
3, not the one you saw, not maybe the 2 you saw, but 3 dropped interceptions.
Yep, that would catching one of those would help.
Yes, one was in the end zone, would have stopped the field goal. One was at the end, would have iced the game. The other, I watched it. It's like, maybe that's not a dropped interception because you got Eddie Jackson like reaching out like this, whatever. 9 dropped interceptions for the Ravens. I wrote about it in the 2-deep zone. They've also had a real hard time in the fourth quarter. They've been blitzing in the fourth quarter with narrow leads, getting burned consistently on those blitz. Now, that's a very correctable situation for Orr, their defensive coordinator. So I think that's something that can turn around. And I don't think that's something necessarily that Bo Nix is going to be able to exploit the way Jamar Chase or even Jameis Winston could exploit it.
So we both like Denver plus 9.5 here.
I like it because I could see this. It could turn into a boat race, but with that, both defenses, I think the Ravens defense is undervalued. I think this turns into one of those 24-20 type games.
All right. Another 1 p.m. game that's going out to a lot of the country, according to the 506 Sports Maps, is the Dallas Cowboys at 3-4 at the 5-3 Atlanta Falcons. Cowboys make the playoffs 26% of the time with a win and 8% of the time with a loss.
Ocho.
Falcon, 89% with a win and 69% with a loss. Nice. Falcons defense is the worst in the league on passes up the middle, but Prescott is struggling there this season.
And everywhere else.
So can he take advantage of it? The
Right.
Cowboys defense is poor against shorter passes and poor against running backs in the passing game. So maybe look for those Bijan Robinson reception props.
It's a very good offense for finding your weaknesses because they can do the Bijan thing. They can run the ball. They can set up play action. They can use Pitts as a deep threat. They now have Mooney, who does a lot as a short passing weapon. A lot of ways the Falcons can pick at your problems, and the Cowboys have a lot of problems.
It really is like both of these teams are struggling to get a pass rush.
Yep.
Bland has been activated, but he still isn't practicing.
Right.
Diggs didn't practice. Micah Parsons still isn't practicing. Like, this is like the defensive injuries are a problem. I think, the difference between these teams is that one of them is healthy and the other one is really not.
That's true. And we like roasting the Cowboys and say, well, if the Cowboys had done this in the offseason, this is a lot of injuries. This is all pros. We didn't mention Tank Lawrence. He's on IR. A lot of all pros, Pro Bowlers, guys who've led the league in interceptions, et cetera, and sacks that they're without.
Michael Allen Brewer does say this feels like a classic slump buster game for Dallas, and I'm a Falcons fan. Well, don't ever bet on Falcons games is our rule around here. So
right, and of course you're a Falcons fan, so of course you're looking at it and say this is a buster. I want to do this, by the way. You think it's a gag or it's like just a bit with me with the Falcons. The Falcons are home favorites right now. The Falcons, as home favorites since last year, are 3-8 against the spread. The Falcons, as home favorites since 2018, are 11-24 against the spread. Now, they win some of those games. They are actually 18-17 straight up in terms of winning. But in terms of wagering,
as home favorites, they're only 18-17.
Yes. Yeah.
The line is Falcons by 2.5.
Okay. Don't bet on the Falcons.
Don't ever bet on Falcons games.
Don't bet on the Falcons. If you can get the Cowboys, if you can tease it up, because it's around 3 now. I saw it at 3. You get to 3.5 or 4, take the Cowboys.
Let's move to 4 p.m., which has, I think, the biggest game of the week, which is the 6-1 Lions at the 6-2 Packers in the awesome NFC North.
Yes.
This is the most important game of the week for the Super Bowl odds.
Ooh.
The Lions make the playoffs 98% of the time with a win, 91% with a loss.
Wow.
But they make the Super Bowl 43% of the time with a win, 31% with a loss.
Holy cow.
The Packers, 86, make the playoffs with a win, 62 with a loss. They make the Super Bowl 14% of the time with a win, 6.5% with a loss. If the Lions win this, their chances of winning the division are at 78%. And the Packers are basically out from the division. If the Lions lose this, they're at 45%, and the Packers move up to 31% to win the division, and the Vikings move up, and the Bears move up as well.
And of course, the Vikings would play in a couple of hours, which would morph.
We'll get to the Vikings in a few minutes.
It would morph the odds there a little bit. Latest game to end all games, it's probably going to come down to game time decision as to who the quarterback would be. Love, I believe, did not practice yesterday, but there's still optimism that he is going to be able to be available. If not, it will be Malik Willis.
I mean, the stats that I basically looked up were all about the Lions offense versus the Packers defense, because we don't know who the quarterback of the Packers is going to be.
Right.
Jared Goff has the second best DVOA in the league against man this year and is average against zones. The Packers are better in zone and play more zone.
Right. They like having their safeties being available in the middle of the field to work.
And the Packers defense is 4th against deep passes, but 27th against short passes. And Goff is very good this year on short passes. So that would be the opposite, right? So maybe they're gonna zone against him, and he's gonna just ding, ding, ding a lot of the Amon-Ra St. Brown and Laporta underneath the zones for like 7-yard gains, rather than trying to go for the big 20-yard gains or down the field to Raymond or anything like that.
And lots of Sonic and Knuckles in the running game, of course, to keep them balanced.
Camden Cap says, how do we as a football community get Max Crosby on the Lions? I will settle for Clowney. I don't see any reason for the Raiders to do that, but I do see a reason for the Panthers to do that, so maybe it will be Clowney.
Yeah, Crosby is not quite Aaron Rodgers level powerful in Las Vegas, but he decides when he gets traded, and I think he likes being king there. I'm just looking at Clowney's health status right now. Because I think
there's the same element that I've talked about with Myles Garrett, which is at a certain point, even as a losing franchise having a losing year, you have a player who your team is identified with.
Yes.
And if you trade him, your fan base will revolt, and you just don't want that. And the fact is, for the Browns and the Raiders, that is the edge rusher.
Right, and especially the Raiders, thousands and thousands of Max Crosby jerseys and things like that. That's what sells the jerseys, etc. It would be a very weird vibe. I think that Crosby really does have his ear. Clowney is healthy. That would be a fit, and everything must go in Carolina.
And here is the thing about Clowney. He's good against the run.
Yes.
Which fits into Iceman saying that an underrated part of losing Hutchinson and Davenport is how good they were at setting the edge against the run compared to their backups. And the Lions, I don't have numbers on this, but the Lions' run defense has fallen off since those guys got hurt.
I believe it. And Clowney's better when he's getting poke to stay focused. I think Dan Campbell can poke a guy.
And if the Lions, defense is having trouble setting the edge, Willis, Josh Jacobs combo is not a good matchup for that.
It isn't, but my feeling on this is if it's Willis, I don't think that the Packers are going to be able to generate enough as being this running and screens team to keep up with the Lions. Like, the difference between Willis and Love is very different when you're facing a top-end opponent as opposed to like a team like the Jaguars, where you say, we can hammer the ball, we'll get enough done with our defense, and we'll win.
The line is Lions by 3.5.
That's a Love line, isn't it?
It seems like they think Love will play.
Right.
And if Love plays, I think I say Packers plus 3.5.
Right, because I could see this being the time that their pass rush gets exposed. And like you said, the fact that they don't set the edge as well against the run gives a chance to Jacobs and things like that. But I'm going to flip it the other way. And if we get a Love no calls, who knows what the line will be, because the line will jump immediately.
The line will change. If we suddenly learn that Willis is starting, I think this line would go to 5 or 6.
5 or 6. I'd still take it at 5 or 6 for the Lions. I would still take the Lions minus 5 or 6.
Another big 4:00 game in the very close NFC West has the Los Angeles Rams at 3-4, at the Seattle Seahawks at 4-4. This is the new Rams, who are the old Rams, who are the Rams with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua.
Yes.
And there are a lot of stats out there. It's very difficult to sort of project how good their offense is with those two guys back, because the stats show that they're so much better with both of those guys on the field, but the sample size is pretty low with both of those guys on the field. So I don't know if their offense is are they really like the second best offense in the league when those guys are both healthy? Or is it just that they've had like 4 games where they were really good when both of those guys were healthy? That being said, I think everyone agrees they're a better team with both of those guys healthy.
Right. I like to say they're kind of where the Buccaneers were about 3 weeks ago, where you were looking at them and say, well, they can win a lot of games because of these 2 receivers and, the veteran quarterback, and they have enough there and they've got a Super Bowl pedigree. That's kind of the Rams right now.
David Cohen says, do we expect the McDonald defense to take shape at any point this season for Seattle? Look, I think that the Seattle defense is about where you would have expected.
Yeah.
They have improved to average.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the pieces that he necessarily wants. They don't have a Roquan Smith at linebacker.
Right.
Julian Love is a nice guy, but they don't, he's a good player, but they don't have a Kyle Hamilton at safety. So he doesn't have the chess pieces that he had in Baltimore. So you're not going to get the defense that he had. And they've got Tremont Jones now playing out of position as an edge rusher instead of playing on the inside. So you're not going to get the defense that he had in Baltimore, but they've been an average defense, as opposed to the Rams, who've been a bad defense. Even with good rookie years from Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, they have been a bad defense. The coverage is bad.
The coverage is bad. They lost guys on the back end in the preseason that they were expecting. You're kind of diving into those 4th, 5th round picks along the way. You're right. The rookies have played well, but they're not like these superlative, defensive rookie of the year shortlisters. Going back to the Seahawks, remember, first 2 or 3 games of the year, there was a defensive line injury emergency. A couple of weeks after that, there was a secondary cornerback injury emergency where Rick Woolen and one of the others was hurt. Right now, everybody is back except Witherspoon. Witherspoon is on the injury report. We're not sure of his status. But McDonald hasn't had 11 guys or even normal injuries to deal with on that Seahawks defense. It's cobbling together this unit for a couple of weeks, cobbling together that unit for a couple of weeks. It might take a while to take shape.
First of all, I'm going to argue with you about the Rams. I do think Jared Verse is a defensive rookie of the year candidate because there aren't many. There's no standout defensive rookie of the year where you're like, that's the rookie of the year. There's a lot of guys having some kind of good years, and I think Verse is one of them.
Okay.
The other injury is DK Metcalf.
Yes, that's right. That is correct. He is on the injury report with a foot injury. We don't know the severity at this point. To your point, Jared Verse, front runner, rookie of the year at plus 100. Plus 100. So he's not just one of the favorites, but he's kind of the prohibitive favorite right now. Good call.
I have to say, if I was voting this week, I would vote for Verse.
Fair. And he has played
well. There have been a couple good cornerbacks. There's that defensive tackle whose name escapes me in Tennessee, who's part of why they're so good against the run. But I think the defensive rookie of the year right now would be Verse.
Here's the numbers, just so you know. Verse at plus 100. Leatu Latu at plus 400. Quinyon Mitchell at plus 600. Kamari Laster having a pretty good darn season at plus 850. And then it kind of goes down from there. But you're right. There's nobody running away with it versus the front runner. I don't know, going back to Metcalf, the exact severity of this injury. Obviously, that's a huge...
He hasn't been practicing, but the headlines were that he is progressing towards playing this week.
Okay. By the way, Geno leads the league in attempts and completions. and yards right now. He has been throwing the
Right.
ball.
So against the secondary, that feels pretty good.
Right. I will say in the fourth quarter, Gino, and remember how many times they're in these either shootouts or they're far behind. Gino leads the league in fourth quarter dropbacks with 120. Nobody else has had more than 94. So there is a lot in that, like we saw this week, where it's like you're just playing catch up in the second half.
Also, an under the radar prop to look at.
Okay.
The Rams were the worst defense in the NFL against tight ends this year. I'm sure you don't bet a lot on Noah Fant, but this may be the week to go with a Noah Fant over if, for example, you are playing on underdog fantasy.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And they do spread that ball all over the place in Seattle.
The line is Rams -1.5, and the official system picks neither.
Picks a neither? I'm going with the Rams because the system is full of weeks and weeks of no Puka and no Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, I try to adjust for Kupp and Nakua, but I have no idea if I'm adjusting the right amount for Nakua. I think you're right. I think err on the side that I'm not adjusting enough for Kupp and Nakua, and err on the Rams -1.5 in this game.
That's my call too.
Let's move to 8 p.m., the night game. The Indianapolis Colts, led by Joe Flacco at 4-4, at the Minnesota Vikings at 5-2. Colts make the playoffs 55% of the time with a win, 33% with a loss. Vikings at 83% with a win, down to 64% with a loss. A big gap in DVOA between these teams, where the Vikings are third and the Colts are 20th. But of course, the big question here is how much better is Flacco than Richardson really when you're running on a 2-game sample of Flacco running this offense? The offenses, by the way, are like right next to each other in DVOA, but the defenses, the Vikings are number 1 and the Colts are number 19. Okay, let's get the Mike thought. Camden Caps, thoughts on the Richardson benching?
I hate the timing of it right now for a couple of reasons. One, I think he's been benched for his overall inconsistency, and the taking the down off was kind of like a minor symptom of a bigger problem. But what it looks like is that he is some sort of softy McSoft face, that he is some kind of immature whatever who lacks leadership or grit or whatever. And so that's the storyline that permeates. Steichen and that team should be aware of the messaging there and not do that. Second reason I don't like this. So we're facing a team that has a lot of diverse blitzing. How do you beat a team that has a lot of diverse blitzing? You run directly at them. Okay. Who is better for running directly at them? Richardson running the zone read and threatening you on the edges and threatening you, with ISOs and things like that, or a 40-year-old pocket passer. So one more thing, left tackle Bernard Raymond is in concussion protocol. So you're going to be possibly going with your backup left tackle with your 40-year-old pocket passer. I hate this on all of those terms.
I think the question about the benching is,
yes,
how much does Richardson learn on the bench versus how much does Richardson learn as the starter? Is it a big difference or is it a small difference?
I think it's a small difference. With the way
if it's a small difference and you feel like you want to go for that playoff spot, and Richardson's ego isn't going to take, which I think most of these guys, I think their egos are fine, right? I think about when Steve Walsh and Troy Aikman fought for the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, and sometimes they gave it to Walsh, and Aikman's ego was fine in the long run. Like, I feel like if we feel like it's a small difference, I kind of understand doing this. If we feel like it's a large difference, then this makes no sense because developing Richardson is the number 1 need for the Colts, much greater than making the playoffs as the number 7 seed this year.
Agreed. And I'd be more comfortable about the ego management if I heard that there was a big meeting of all the coaching staff and of Flacco and Richardson where they articulated these things, and maybe you bring in Pittman and like a couple other guys, and they all walk out knowing what's going on, and Richardson had this communicated to him. Or if the coach just made an announcement and the guys found out about it on social media.
Which is bad.
Which is bad coaching, bad management, bad leadership, bad everything on the part of the Colts. And that gets me worried about whatever the ego is, these things aren't getting communicated well to to this young man, the age of my son, who is put in this position right now.
Jake Smith says, could they be protecting Richardson's image by not putting up against a tough run of good teams, which would make him look even worse than he has? I don't think that they think of it in terms of what defenses are coming up that they're going to play against.
If they're worried about his image, they did a hell of a job here doing it right at this moment.
Yeah.
I'll say this. I was watching a bunch of the film. He does not like throwing little shallow crosses over the middle. He does not like checking down to the backs. He is firing YOLO ball after YOLO ball after YOLO ball. They are a lot of times off target. He's leaving a lot of easy completions on the table. I was doing the thing I don't like to do, which is watching the body language of guys like Pittman when they're done running the route. I think there's a lot of discomfort. Like, why aren't we getting these like 8, 9, 10 yard chunks? Steichen's probably upset. Some of the veterans are probably upset. And that is what led to this. Maybe more than, dude, coach, I'm gassed. Give me a break, whatever that was.
One interesting stat on the other side. There are a lot of stats that favor the Vikings passing game in this. Like, for example, the Vikings are number 1 third down passing, and the Colts are 26th. But Sam Darnold, according to the FTN Stats Hub, which you should all be subscribing to, leads the NFL in DVOA against man coverage. It's a small sample size to split up half a year between coverage types, but he is minus 10% against cover 3 this year. And who loves the cover 3? Gus Bradley.
Oh, my God, yeah.
So how much does that small sample size performance against cover 3 mean? I mean, it makes sense with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison that they're really great against man.
Right. Man, great against man, and then you can kind of spread things out really far on a cover 3 when you're setting those guys deep. TJ Hawkinson, per Kevin O'Donnell, is ready to play.
We'll be back. Yes.
Right. So I don't know if what we need from the splits there. It looks like there's going to be wins all over the place for the Vikings offense.
The line is Vikings -5. This is another one where the system doesn't really have a pick.
Interesting, because of the quarterback.
And -5 is a weird middle line, right? It's like not 7 and it's not 3. It's kind of, games aren't normally decided by 5.
Right.
I think I would go Vikings -5 here.
Yes.
I guess it depends on how much you think that those first 2 Flacco games were for real.
I get the impression that Flacco, he's not going to force balls and force turnovers when he's seeing complicated blitzes that he doesn't like. Maybe he's an older guy, he can figure them out, but doesn't like them. He's going to check down. And I have a feeling that's going to starve out the Colts offense. The stats will look better. The results won't look as good.
So you would say Vikings -5 also.
Take Vikings -5 on this. Yeah.
Yep. That's what I'm going with as well. All right. That does it for our Week 9 preview. That's the beginning of the second half of the season. I can't believe we're here already. Everybody have a happy Halloween tonight. Follow my Twitter and threads, and I'll be coming at you live from MetLife Stadium for some Texans-Jets action. And everybody enjoy Week 9 in the NFL. And we will be back at you on Monday with our Week 9 review. So long, everybody. Enjoy the week.